Check Podcasts.
Hi, I'm Bruce Williams. I'm the CEO of the Greater Victoria Chamber of Commerce. This is Chamber Chats, coming to you as always from the podcasting studios here at Czech Media Group, one of our chamber champions. I would like to acknowledge, as always, that I live and work in the historic lands of the Lekwungen-speaking nations, known to us as Songhees and Cossapsum. And all of this is made possible by the support of Island Savings, a division of First West Credit Union, who are changing what banking can do for people, for community, and for the world. Speaking of the world, we're all very conscious of the fact that our climate is changing. People have differing arguments and points of view on what's causing that and why it's happening. But the bottom line is we have all become a little bit more resilient because we prepare ourselves better for what could be extreme climate activities, the heat dome, the atmospheric river, all those things. I want to talk about that preparedness and what we can anticipate in the days, weeks, months, and years to come with our guest today. Baljit Sekhon is a warning preparedness meteorologist with Environment and Climate Change Canada. Bobby, how are you?
I'm doing very well, Bruce. Thanks for having me.
One of the things that we've seen change, for example, is the name of the ministry for which you work, because it used to be just Environment Canada, but now it's Environment and Climate Change Canada. So that kind of tells a story too, doesn't it?
Yeah, as we know, the climate is changing, and it's important to acknowledge that so we can stay prepared as we move forward in time.
So when you meet someone for the first time and you tell them that you're the warning preparedness meteorologist for Environment and Climate Change Canada, and they say, "What do you do?" What's your answer?
Well, sometimes I have to take a breath in between because it is quite lengthy. But essentially, what I do is I'm a liaison between our operational meteorologists in our forecast center and our stakeholders. So that includes the general public. We do a lot of media interviews in which we try to basically convey the message of the forecast, and not only what the weather will be, but what the weather will do is kind of what we're trying to do more of. And actually, a lot of my work is with the emergency management organizations around the province. So I meet with them on a regular basis. We exchange information on not only weather, but learning about vulnerabilities and sensitivities around the province, and other. And we work with other provincial and federal agencies as well, such as the River Forecast Center when it comes to flooding events and just freshet in general. For example, this period right now, BC Wildfire Service during wildfire season especially, and even BC CDC for things like heat waves and smoke events and air quality in general. So certainly where our strength is with our partners.
When we think about preparedness, we think about, I need to have an earthquake kit, and I need to make sure that I've got an extra pair of glasses and a clothing bag. But the actual initial stages of preparedness is what you're talking about exactly, that you give us the weather forecast. And you tell us what's coming down the road and what we have to be ready for, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, our bread and butter is really our 7-day forecast and all our alerts. We're the official issuer of all weather alerts in Canada. And so we definitely try to give a heads up ahead of any impactful weather, any severe weather, for example. We're monitoring that 24/7 here at the Operations Center. So that's something we take very seriously. And we're looking at a lot of data, trying to drill it down into a forecast, into a warning, so that we can help protect the lives and property of Canadians.
In a way, we've kind of come to expect the unexpected, and it's a little bit disconcerting in some ways, but is this uncertainty the new reality?
Well, in the past few years, we've seen some extreme weather, and it's not the type of weather that I grew up in necessarily. So things are changing. We've seen that in the wildfire seasons. The past 8 summers, 5 of them have been the top 5 wildfire seasons of all time. And then also things like the 2021 heat dome, that was an unprecedented event. And then, of course, we had that severe flooding in 2021 November as well. So, we're seeing more of this extreme weather and more impacts from extreme weather as well. And so it is something that we are trying to stay on top of.
Yeah, I mean, there's impacts to the planet, there's impacts to our economy. A lot of this uncertainty is impacting people's mental health, quite honestly, because there's a lot of uneasy feelings around a lot of that stuff. But I want to do a little bit of word nerd stuff here, a little bit of language stuff. What's the difference between weather and climate?
Great question, Bruce. So climate is something that is more of a long-term thing. So we look at climate to the past, in the past 10 years, in the past 50 years, past 100 years. that kind of thing, or even over thousands of years for that matter. So think of climate as a longer time period, and that includes into the future too. Now, when we talk about weather, weather is kind of our day-to-day weather. This is our 7-day forecast, our warnings and alerts, these type of things. So it's kind of different time scales and different way we approach it.
And when you talk about weather, so you're a meteorologist, but when you talk about weather forecasting like that, when you can see what's going to happen 7 days, 14 days out, how do you do that? What are the tools that you use to do that?
Yeah, definitely. We're lucky to have a lot of tools at our disposal here at Environment and Climate Change Canada, and we're monitoring things 24/7. That includes satellites. We just had some new satellites go up in the past 5 to 10 years, which are helping with higher resolution imagery, more frequent imagery, more types of satellite channels to look at for different parts of the atmosphere. Also, radars. We use radars for detecting not only rain and precipitation, but sometimes other objects that might be throwing us off and determining, hey, is this actual precipitation or is this maybe birds? And so we've gone through a radar renewal over the past few years as well, right across Canada, and added new technology so we can better detect severe weather. In addition to that, we have lots of reporting stations, not as many as we'd like, but we do have a lot of reporting stations right across the country and even some over the ocean to give us reports of pressure, temperature, wind, and in these type of things. And then another big part of our analysis is using weather models. And so these are computer generated models that use complex physics equations combined with all these observations and more that I talked about. And they crunch those numbers and push out some forecasts, some projections of what the weather might be in the coming time, given the current state of the weather. So those are something that we look at quite often. The scale is getting better and better, but still, it's something that we as meteorologists need to look at and see whether this is a scenario in which this weather model is going to lead us in the right direction, or perhaps there's too much uncertainty here, and this is where we need to communicate to the public and to the partners that there are different scenarios possible.
Yeah, when we see things like on Czech television, when Ed or whoever's doing the weather at the time, we'll show you a map and it will show you the satellite picture of something that's swirling or where the fronts are and how they're going to move. How do you know that they're going to move that way? Like, is it prevailing wind? Is it warm air versus cold air? How do you know?
Yeah, so I mean, definitely winds are part of it too. But yeah, looking at satellite loops, we can see, usually back at least 24 hours, we look to see kind of how this weather pattern has been developing, what kind of weather features are we looking at, and how this might progress into the future. And we spend a lot of time training on this earlier in our careers, how to use short range forecasting techniques to actually project the weather, even without using computer models. But definitely computer models, especially when we get out past day 2, those really help us bring in the weather, bring in the forecasts, and see how things are going to progress further in time.
A term that was used early on in the days when we had conversations about climate change was warming. We're going to talk about that next. Our guest today on Chamber Chats is talking all about weather and the preparedness that we have to have in place to get ready for what might ever be happening in our weather and our climate. He is Baljit Sekhon. He is a warning preparedness meteorologist for Environment and Climate Change Canada. So when we first started talking about the climate change thing, it was referred to as global warming, but we now just more refer to it as climate change. What does the warming imply, though? Like, what's going on?
Well, certainly I'm not a climate change expert, but what I can tell you is that generally, yes, the planet is warming, and global warming is a part of climate change, of course, but it doesn't necessarily mean that each place is going to be warming or at the same rate. But climate change kind of encompasses more extreme weather beyond just what the average temperatures are going to be. I mean, average temperatures are important. Most of Canada is actually warming up at 2 times the average rate of the world, and up in the Arctic, it's even 3 or 4 times greater. So that's an important factor. But other types of extreme weather we're seeing more of as well. So we're talking heat waves that are more intense, lasting longer. Atmospheric rivers that are packing more of a punch in terms of more precipitation, sometimes stalling over areas, and there's many types of extreme weather that are associated with climate change beyond just global warming. So they're definitely interrelated, but you could think of the overall umbrella is the climate change piece.
Yeah, the wildfire season is coming very soon. Unfortunately, we know that. We anticipate it not being very good, but we never know for sure until we actually get into the season, I suppose, too. But there's a part of that I've always kind of wondered about, and I don't know if you can answer this or not, but there are fires that burn under the ground. They don't burn on the forest canopy or anywhere on the forest. They burn underground. What's that all about?
Yeah, so sometimes, like you mentioned, especially over the winter, we can see these fires that are burning underground and they last through the winter. And sometimes we see them reappear in the spring. And sometimes they're even called zombie fires. And so what's happening there, and we often see this in northern BC, is where we have a large fire that's been going and into the fall, but then we have some snowfall as the winter approaches. But because of the soil and some peat in the soil, the fire can keep going. Sure, there's a lack of oxygen, so it's going to slow down, but the smoldering's going to keep happening under the snowpack. And then what you see in the spring as things start to melt, and especially if the snow melts and we get a dry, strong wind that adds more kind of oxygen and helps fan the fire, we can see that kind of reignite and force up again. So those are an interesting phenomenon that BC wildfire deals with.
Yeah, we've seen disruptions in the last 10 years, I think, a little more frequently. And now, is it just me, or is it windier than it used to be around here?
Yeah, I unfortunately don't have a lot of stats on winds. I know a lot of people from the island do mention that certain spots are windier than others, but there's a weather influence there. But there can also be changes to the landscape. Sometimes, if there's been some trees cut down in a certain area, maybe you're going to see more winds coming from there as well. So it's hard for me to actually quantify that without taking a look at each situation independently. But generally, there can be a number of factors.
Yeah, you referred to the atmospheric river that we had in November of 2021, and that was an astounding amount of rain that fell in a very short period of time. In the world in general, there's the same amount of water that's dispersed across the planet. So when we're having that huge deluge here, where is it not raining for that water to be here and raining on us?
Yeah, so on the West Coast, we kind of see this variety of precipitation patterns from year to year, from the Alaskan coast down to the BC coast, and then you have more of that Oregon, California coast. And so some years you'll see that it's drier along the west coast of British Columbia. That's because sometimes the jet stream is pushing systems more over to the Alaskan Panhandle, or it could be that the way the subtropical high pressure sets up, that we're actually seeing more of the jet stream point towards Northern California, and we've seen kind of some terrible flooding in that area as well in the past years. So and vice versa, if we're getting lots of precipitation, the fire hose is pointing towards the BC West Coast, then it's possible that places like California are having a bit of a drought situation that winter. So it really depends on the weather pattern of the year, and there are different parts of the coast can be wet at different years.
Yeah, so it's the same thing then, I guess, for a drought, right? We have a drought here, which means that all that rain is somewhere else.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so, usually Alaskan Panhandle or the California, Oregon, or both of them, those can often see the more of the precipitation if we're in a more of a drought and more of that blocked pattern that's keeping the moisture from reaching us. And we've seen years where the Alaskan Panhandle and the north coast of BC kind of take the brunt of the systems one after another, almost every 18 hours at times, it seems. And then other years, we've seen some great agriculture losses in Northern California, actually, because they won't stop raining there because the pattern is moving towards them. So yeah, certainly every year things can change.
So you're a preparedness guy. What pivots need to happen in our lives for us to prepare for these extremities of climate and weather?
Yeah, so I mean, preparedness is we encourage definitely to prepare not out of fear, but just out of safety, really. And so we can do simple things in our life as having first aid kits both at home and in our vehicles, and having supplies of water, food, warm clothing in case of power outages, these type of things. But a lot of it also is just communicating with one another. We saw that unfortunately during the 2021 heat dome, where there was a lot of seniors living alone that became very ill or even lost their lives, unfortunately. And maybe some of that can be prevented if we just check in on one another during extreme weather events to make sure we're doing okay. So yeah, there are many things that you can do, and a lot of municipalities, a lot of regions across British Columbia, who we work with as well, make plans for that region, for that particular climate, so that residents can take their own actions, because there's things that all of us can do to help prepare well ahead of these events.
A lot of this stuff impacts our food supply, it affects travel. We're going to talk about that next. Our guest today on Chamber Chats is a guy who is a warning preparedness meteorologist with Environment and Climate Change Canada. He is Baljit Sekhon. So we saw the atmospheric river have a huge impact on our food supply. The whole thing in general is having an impact on travel with weather disruptions because of that. What does that look like going down the road, even in the next year?
I mean, definitely, Vancouver Island is in a unique situation where a lot of food is brought in, and so when we have these wind events, especially in the fall and winter time, and there's delays on the ferries or even cancellations. Obviously, that has impacts on residents, on businesses for sure, and then even. As we see impacts from wildfires, we saw that the Cameron Lake Bluffs wildfire that closed Highway 4 between Tofino, Ucluelet, and the rest of the island. I read in the news that it was $44 million in losses for 2.5 weeks of the highway being shut down, and also there was single lane traffic thereafter too. So that's huge impacts of these kind of extreme events. And then also during the 2021 flooding, the November atmospheric river event, we saw record rainfall in the Malahat, and that closed part of the Malahat as well. And these type of disruptions are obviously tricky on the supply chain and to businesses and anybody in that industry.
Yeah, the food importing thing, we mentioned that quite a bit on these programs and in a lot of chamber stuff we do. We import 90%, 90% of the food that we consume on Vancouver Island. So again, supply chain is a huge factor there. And also the vineyards got hit hard last year, so that's impacting our supply of that, and that's an economic hit for this whole thing. But from a chamber point of view, from a business point of view, what are examples of businesses taking their own measures that you've heard of to mitigate the changes?
Yeah, I mean, the fact of the matter is that British Columbians are fairly resilient. We're pretty creative, and there's people around the province that are taking some measures into their own hands. And I was reading an article recently about the Sunshine Coast, and of course, there's been drought issues over there with not getting maybe enough precipitation combined with a growth in population. And so there was actually a cidery up there where they have their own ponds to draw water from, because if water restrictions come in, they'll be restricted from getting water to maintain their business. So, that was an interesting story I read just recently in the news. But apart from that, I mean, people are pivoting their businesses as well, just trying to help the community in ways, and also keep their business going, because ultimately, if we work together, we can keep everyone safe, but also keep the economy going too.
Yeah, I referred earlier to the fact that it's very unsettling when these things happen. It impacts people's anxiety or their mental health, and they worry about things. People of different ages have different concerns, but human health in general is impacted by the weather that we have, isn't it?
Absolutely. There's huge impacts on human health, and not just in the areas that are impacted by the extreme weather events, but also in other areas downstream. I mean, we've seen that in the past, from the 2017 wildfires here in BC, carrying smoke all the way to the GTA, and, huge expense on the healthcare system there. Unfortunately, a lot of people getting sick from the smoke that had traveled there. So it's, there are all these impacts. Wildfire smoke is a big one, because even though we have seen some wildfires, like I mentioned earlier, and additionally, we saw one at the Souk Potholes area at Old Man Lake, and there can be the local events of smoke events, but also we can bring in smoke here on Vancouver Island. So sometimes we have lower pressure setting up along the coast that actually sucks in the smoky air from the interior or parts of the United States, and that can deteriorate the air quality. And of course, those tiny particles of 2.5 microns of forest fire ash, they can get into our lungs and then get into our circulatory system too. And they can make people very ill, especially the vulnerable, pregnant people, older people, younger people, outdoor workers are all very vulnerable to these things. So there's the wildfire, there's heat, and then of course, there's our regular hazards in terms of flooding threats and cold weather and all those too. Yeah.
Yeah, you talked specifically about Canada's situation in all of this. The Arctic is very vulnerable, is it not?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a fairly isolated area, but there are a lot of people living up there. It's a very important land to a lot of people that call the Arctic home. And unfortunately, like I mentioned earlier, it's warming 3 or 4 times faster than the average. So there is that piece. And it's kind of an unfortunate loop where we have Arctic ice melting, and we've seen record low Arctic ice cover in the past few years. And with that, there's less ice to reflect the sun's radiation. And so then we get the ocean warming even more up there in the Arctic and causing more melt. And so there's all these type of things that are changing the weather patterns up there, that are eroding the coastline and changing migration patterns of animals, which is really hard on the hunters up there. So certainly a lot of impacts of climate change in the north.
Again, as you mentioned earlier, there's been huge advancements in technology, right? Of all these tools that you can use to do the forecasting that you do. So that technology has moved along like a lot recently, right?
Absolutely, and we've got a lot of great researchers here at Environment and Climate Change Canada that are constantly working on new products, new types of weather models, new technologies to help improve our weather forecasting, to help maybe forecast further out with more precision. Find out more information about uncertainty, these type of things. And so, we have a lot of computing power there. We have a lot of good people working on it, and it does help. And weather forecasting has come a long way over the past 20, 30 years, especially. We've gotten very fine resolution. We have models now that can refine down to 1 kilometers or even lower for certain specific regions sometimes, which really helps. And then, like I mentioned, in addition to models, we have radars, and the radars really come into play, especially where in places where we do have tornadoes, especially in the prairies and out east. Better detection of severe weather, the more lead time we can have. And in a severe thunderstorm situation, even minutes make a difference. And so any more lead time that we can get from these new advancements in technology can help save lives.
Yeah. Got about 20 seconds left here. What's the weather going to be like this summer? What are we going to live through?
Yeah, it's hard to say this far out, especially, but generally our seasonal forecast models are showing a probability of above normal temperatures. Now, that doesn't really tell us if there's going to be many heat waves or it's just going to be a little bit above normal. It's really just a trend forecast. So not a lot we can glean from there. Keep an eye on your forecast.
Right on. And keep your eye on Environment Canada, Environment and Climate Change Canada. Baljit Sekhon, thanks for your time today.
You're most welcome.
Bobby is a warning preparedness meteorologist with Environment and Climate Change Canada. I'm not. I'm Bruce Williams, and we'll see you again for another Chamber Chat.